hand and a cold beer in the other, not wiping gun oil off a Remington 700 that hadn't seen daylight since the 90s. The plan was simple, a blueprint for happiness Martha and I had drawn up over 40 years of marriage, 4 decades at the machining plant, a modest pension that we'd saved religiously for, and the rest of our days watching the sunsets and spoiling grandchildren. That plan died the night my phone rang at 3:17 a.m., the kind of shrill, insistent call that rips your soul right out of your body before you even hear a voice on the other end. Instead of planning fishing trips and RV routes across the country, I spent the last 3 months meticulously tracking down the 3 animals who kicked in my daughter's door and shattered her life. I'm 60, 2 years old, I have arthritis in my knees that flares up when it rains, and I'm about to do something that will either end with me in a prison cell or a pine box. But looking at the hollow, doubt shell of what used to be my vibrant little girl, I don't see any other way. So I need to ask you right now, before I tell you the darkness I descended into. If the law failed your child, if the system shrugged its shoulders while your flesh and blood was bleeding, would you sit back and accept it in the name of being a civilized citizen? Or would you pick up the rifle? Tell me if you think I've lost my mind, or if you would have done the exact same thing. To understand why a man like me, a man who spent his entire life following the rules, paying his taxes early, returning lost wallets, and just trying to be a good neighbor, ended up here in the dark with a weapon, you need to know about Sarah. She's my only child. Martha and I tried for years, heartbreaks and miscarriages one after another, and when Sarah finally came along, she was the miracle we didn't think we were destined to get. She grew up tough, smart, way too independent for her own good sometimes, but with a heart so big it scared me because I knew the world likes to break big hearts. She became a nurse, pediatric oncology of all things. That tells you everything you need to know about her character. She spends her days making terrified little kids smile while facing down the hardest realities of life. She saved up and bought a little fixer-upper about 20 minutes from us, a quiet street, a safe neighborhood with old oak trees and neighbors who wave. I was so proud of her I could burst. I'd just handed in my final notice at the machining plant. 4 decades of smelling like coolant and metal shavings were finally over. Martha had already picked out the RV we were going to rent for our inaugural cross-country trip. Life felt complete. You know that specific feeling when you think you've finally crossed the finish line and you can just breathe. That was us. Then came that Tuesday night in October. I'll never forget the date. It's burned into my brain like a brand on cattle. The call came from the local PD, a dispatch officer trying to stay calm. They said there had been an incident at Sarah's house. When Martha and I got to the hospital, I walked past 3 rooms before I realized the broken person in the 4th bed was my own daughter. I won't go into the graphic details because, frankly, I can barely handle the flashes of them in my own nightmares, but 3 men broke in. It wasn't a gentle burglary. They kicked the door off its hinges. They weren't looking for money. They were looking for chaos, for victims. They beat her within an inch of her life before they violated the sanctuary of her home. The doctors, faces grim, said if her elderly neighbor hadn't heard the screaming over his television and turned on his porch light, scaring them off like the cockroaches they were, she wouldn't be here. The first week was a blur of surgeries, police statements, and Martha silently crying in hospital waiting room chairs. Detective Henderson was assigned to the case. He seemed decent enough, young, eager, with a firm handshake. He promised us the world. "We'll find them, Mr. Davis. Whoever did this left a mess. We have leads. We're running forensics." We clung to those words like a lifeline. But weeks turned into a month, then 6 weeks. The leads dried up into dust. It was a random attack, they said, which makes it harder. No DNA matches in the current system. Just grainy security footage from 3 doors down showing a dark sedan speeding away, taillights blurring in the night. Sarah was physically healing, the bruises fading to yellow and then disappearing, but the light inside her was gone. My vibrant, fearless girl wouldn't sleep without every single light in the house blazing. She put 4 new deadbolts on her door. She flinched when I, her own father, hugged her too suddenly. She couldn't go back to work. The trauma was too deep. The fear paralyzed her. Watching her disintegrate like that, a slow-motion erasure of the person she used to be, while the monsters who did it were out there somewhere laughing, eating, living their lives free. It started a fire inside me. It wasn't a flash of anger. It was a slow, burning, corrosive rage that I couldn't turn off. It ate at my stomach lining. I went down to the station every day, then every other day. Eventually, Henderson wouldn't even come out of his office, sending a junior officer to tell me there were no new updates. They had moved on to newer cases, fresher bodies. My daughter was just a statistic in a cold file somewhere in a metal cabinet. That's when the realization hit me like a physical blow to the chest. Nobody was coming to save us. The cavalry wasn't coming. I stopped going to the police station. I stopped waiting for permission. I started doing my own work. I'm a machinist by trade. My whole career was based on precision, on looking at a raw block of metal, seeing the final product inside it, and figuring out the exact steps, down to the thousandth of an inch to reveal it. I decided to treat this investigation the exact same way. It was just a problem that needed precise steps. I went back to Sarah's neighborhood, not during the day when the police had canvassed, but at night, between midnight and 4 a.m. I talked to people the police didn't bother with. The late, night delivery drivers dropping off pizzas, the insomniac old lady 3 streets over who sits on her porch chains, smoking all night. It took 3 nights of walking those streets before the old lady, Mrs. Higgins, mentioned something. She'd seen a car not the night of the attack, but 2 nights prior. It had been driving slow, prowling. She noticed it because it had a very specific, loud, rattling muffler and a busted left tail light covered with red tape. A dark blue, mid-2000s Honda Civic. It wasn't much, a needle in a haystack of cheap cars, but it was more than the cops had. I said goodbye to my retirement schedule. I told Martha I was taking up photography to explain my long absences. I spent my days driving around the seedier parts of the city, the industrial parks, the neighborhoods where houses had plywood over the windows. I was just looking, scanning every beat-up Honda I saw. It was monotonous, soul-crushing work. It took me nearly 7 weeks of 12-hour days in the driver's seat of my truck. I found the car parked behind a run-down auto body shop on the west side, a place known for chopping stolen parts. The tape on the tail light was peeling, but it was there. I didn't call Henderson. I parked my truck a block away, found a vantage point on the 2nd floor of an abandoned warehouse overlooking the shop, and I waited. I sat in the dust and pigeon droppings for 3 days, just watching through binoculars. I learned their faces. 3 punks, maybe late 20s, early 30s. I saw the way they carried themselves, arrogant, twitchy, laughing too loud. I watched one of them mimic kicking something invisible and laugh with his buddies high-fiving, and I knew in my gut, with absolute certainty, that was them reliving what they did to my little girl. The bile rose in my throat so hard I almost choked. I learned their patterns. I learned when they bought drugs, when they bought cheap takeout. Finally, I learned where they lived, a flop house about 10 miles out of town, down a dirt road, isolated by scrub pine and neglect. Martha knew something was up, of course. You can't be married 40 years and hide a hurricane inside you. But she didn't ask. I think she was terrified of the answer, terrified that if she acknowledged it, it would become real. She just saw me in the garage, cleaning the Remington I used to hunt deer with 20 years ago, buying fresh ammunition, packing a duffel bag with heavy-duty zip ties, duct tape, and a first aid kit. I had the location. I knew there were 3 of them. I knew they were violent. And I knew the police weren't going to do a damn thing until these guys eventually killed someone next time. So that's the situation I was in. I was sitting in my driveway at 10 p.m., the engine of my F-150 idling low in the night air. I was looking at the warm glow of my house windows, thinking about my wife asleep inside, the woman who deserved that peaceful sunset retirement. And then I was thinking about my broken daughter across town, shaking under her blankets with the lights on. I had to make a final choice right then and there, the fork in the road. Before I tell you what happened when I drove out to that isolated flop house in the woods, I want you to pause for a second. Really pause. Go down to the comments section and tell me truly what you would have done in my shoes right at that moment. Would you have turned off the engine, gone back inside to your wife, and hoped that karma would eventually catch them in the next life? Or would you have put that truck in reverse and finished what the law wouldn't even start? I didn't turn the engine off. I put the truck in reverse and backed out of the driveway, the tires crunching softly on the asphalt. It felt like leaving my entire life behind. I drove out to the county line, where the streetlights end and the darkness feels heavier. Their house was a rotting modular home set way back in the woods, invisible from the main road. It was 2 a.m. by the time I parked my truck a quarter-mile away in a logging clearing and huffed it through the brush. There was one light on inside the trailer, and I could hear loud, thumping bass music vibrating the thin walls. I didn't kick down the door like some action hero in the movies. I'm 62. If I kick a door like that, I'm blowing out my hip. I used stealth. I learned it in the army a lifetime ago, long before I was a machinist, and it turns out, your body never really forgets how to move quietly when the adrenaline is pumping. I crept around the back. The smell coming from the place was wretched. The back window was unlocked. Sloppy, arrogant criminals who thought they were untouchable. I slipped inside, landing softly on a pile of dirty laundry. The smell inside hit me like a physical wall. Stale beer, chemical smoke, sweat, and filth. I crept down the narrow hallway toward the living room. They were all there, passed out amid the squalor on sagging couches. Bottles and drug paraphernalia were everywhere. The one with the loud laugh, the leader, a guy with a neck tattoo, was snoring with his mouth open on a recliner. I didn't feel fear anymore. The shaking stopped. I just felt cold, absolute clarity. It was like looking at a blueprint. I walked up to the leader and nudged his foot hard with the barrel of the Remington. He snorted awake, blinking groggily against the dim light. His eyes tried to focus, and then they went saucer-wide when he processed the silhouette of a man holding a hunting rifle 2 feet from his face. "Don't move," I said. My voice was quieter than I expected, dead calm. It terrified him more than shouting would have. The other 2 started stirring at the sound of my voice. It got chaotic fast. One of them, skinny and twitchy, jumped up from the couch, his hand reaching for something tucked under the cushion. A pistol, I assumed. I didn't hesitate. I shifted my aim and fired a single round into the ceiling, right above his head. In that small, confined tin box of a trailer, the sound was deafening. It was like a grenade going off. Plaster and dust rained down on them. Their ears must have been ringing as hard as mine were. that froze them instantly. The skinny one dropped back onto the couch, hands in the air, trembling uncontrollably. The leader in the chair was hyperventilating. The next one doesn't go into the roof, I said, cycling the bolt on the rifle, ejecting the spent casing with a loud metallic clack and chambering a fresh round. That sound is universal language. I didn't go there to execute them, though God knows a dark part of my soul wanted to. I went there to make sure they never hurt anyone again, to get the proof the cops were too lazy to find. I made them get on their stomachs. I made the leader zip, tie the other two, wrists behind their backs, tight. I'd brought industrial vac zip ties, you aren't breaking those. Then I tied the leader myself, hauling his arms back until he whimpered. They were crying now, begging, swearing on their mothers' graves they didn't mean it. It was a mistake. The usual pathetic cowardice of bullies when the tables finally turn on them. I ignored them. I tossed the place. I found their stash tucked in a vent cash, watches, jewelry from other robberies. And then, in a kitchen drawer, under some filthy silverware, I found it. My daughter's hospital nursing ID badge. They had kept it as a trophy. Seeing that little piece of plastic with her smiling face on it, knowing these filth had touched it, nearly made me pull the trigger for real. The red mist descended, and I had to grip the rifle until my knuckles turned white to stop myself. Instead, I pulled out my smartphone. I took photos of everything, the stolen goods, the drugs, the gun under the cushion, Sarah's ID. Then, I turned the video camera on. I stood over the leader, the barrel pointed at his knee. Start talking. I said, tell the camera exactly what you did on October 14th on Elm Street. Every detail. If you lie, if you leave anything out, I start taking pieces off you. They sang. They sang like canaries. They gave me a detailed, tearful confession, tripping over each other to blame the others, describing things that made my stomach churn, confirming everything Sarah had said. I recorded it all. Then I called Detective Henderson on his personal cell phone. It was 3:30 a.m. He answered groggily. "Who is this?" "It's William Davis," I said. "I did your job for you. Those 3 men you couldn't find, they're tied up at this address on County Road 9. I have their confessions on video, and I found my daughter's stolen property in their possession." There was dead silence on the other end. "You have 20 minutes before I leave, detective. If you aren't here, I can't guarantee their safety." I hung up. I waited outside in the cool night air until I heard the distant wail of sirens cutting through the silence of the woods. Then I slipped out the back door into the tree line, circled around through the brush, and made it back to my truck without being seen. I drove home in silence, the adrenaline crash hitting me so hard my hands were shaking on the wheel. The cops arrested them. They had to. With the video confessions, the stolen goods, the drugs, and Sarah's ID, it was an open, shut case. They tried to pressure me, of course. They wanted to know who tied them up, who fired the shot into the ceiling. They threatened me with charges for breaking and entering, unlawful restraint, vigilante action. But Henderson, to his credit, stepped up. I don't know what he told his superiors, but the official report was very vague about how the suspects were discovered. In that condition, attributing it to an anonymous tip, and in fighting among the criminal element, I think he knew he owed me one. He knew the system had failed us, and he looked the other way. Sarah is. She's getting better. It's slow. But knowing they are locked up in maximum security, facing decades behind bars, lifted a massive weight off her chest. She's back in therapy, and last week, she actually laughed. A real, genuine belly laugh at something Martha said, for the first time since October. That sound was better than any retirement party. I don't know if I'll ever truly get that peaceful retirement I dreamed of. The fishing dock doesn't seem as appealing anymore. Every time I close my eyes in the quiet of the night, I see that filthy trailer, I smell the fear, I hear that gunshot ringing in my ears. I carry the weight of what I did, the line I crossed, every single day. I became a criminal to catch criminals. But then I look at my daughter, starting to rebuild her foundation brick by brick, and I know in my heart I made the right trade. I traded my peace of mind for hers, and I'd do it again tomorrow. So, hit that like button if you think a father did the right thing protecting his cub when the wolves came knocking. If you want to hear more stories about the messy reality when the system fails and real people have to step up to the plate, make sure you subscribe to the channel. And seriously, I want to read your final thoughts on this whole mess down in the comments section. Was I a hero doing what had to be done, or just another criminal with a gun? I'll see you all in the next story.